And so now we're back in our data model view. And what we're going to do for this next step is go back and talk a little bit about another concept that's different in Power BI that'll be really helpful as you go. And whether you're using a very simple data model or a more complicated one, this will be useful really no matter what. So what we're going to talk about first is creating DAX, which is the formula language of Power BI, and that's that concept we're going to cover. Then we're going to use that to create some measures, and we'll use those to create some visuals, and then we'll talk about some sort of formatting and updating options for your report.
In the creating of a report, the first thing you'll want to think about is how will your stakeholders want or need to see your data, and that should be at the forefront of what decisions you make at this point.
Yep. All right, so brief introduction to DAX. It stands for Data Analysis Expressions, but it's really just a fancy way to say these are some formulas you can use in Power BI, and you use them to create these reusable measures that will sort of analyze your data for you, and they'll sum up or aggregate your data. So DAX has some very basic commands. It can get very complex as well, but we're just going to cover these basics about, you want to count up how many people answered a certain question a certain way, or you want to sum, or you want to average things. Those are really basic commands. Those are very similar to the formulas that are in Excel, and this kind of translates pretty well between the two systems. These DAX formulas are generally used in fact tables to aggregate that data in some way. So you have all that raw data, row by row by row, and so now you want to aggregate it up and summarize it so you can get a quick glance view of what your data means. The nice thing is that these are reusable and they can reference each other. So you can build DAX formulas that reference other DAX formulas you entered, so you don't have to re-enter data over and over again. So it's a really nice, it's almost really a programming thing again, but it's a pretty simplified basic thing that still gives you a lot of power. So this is what a basic measure looks like in DAX. So what you have is your measure name. So that's the first thing you have to do is give it a name. So in this case, we're going to call this count responses. So what we're doing is we're counting up the responses for a given in the fact table, and then we'll use our dimensions to break that down. So count responses, and then there's an equal sign, and then you have your formula. So first thing is our function, so we're going to use the count function, so that will just count up, and then we'll say, okay, what do you want to count up? And we'll put that in those parentheses, and so what we want to count is in the fact responses table, and then we'll count the response column. So we're doing a name, function, table, and a column. And the nice thing about Power BI, which you'll see in a second, is it sort of suggests these to you as you go. So you're not just sort of flying blind, but that's sort of the basics of a formula. So what this looks like, if you were to put it in a table, is this. So we have our count responses table, and then if we put it in a table with our question dimension of overall effectiveness as a teacher, we have this question that we got, and then we have all our responses from our dim response. It will just show a count, so just a number of how many students answered things in that category for that question. So now what we want to do, though, is instead of just displaying things as a count, we maybe want to display these as a percentage. So we want to display them a slightly different way. So to do that, what we need to get is our denominator. So right now we have, 40, 173, 253, etc. But we need to know how many total answers there were for this question, so then we can divide 40 by whatever and get the percentage. So we'll actually do another measure that gives us a count of all the responses for that question. And that will look like this. So we have count all responses. So we have count all responses, and this is a different DAX formula. And this is called the calculate formula. And this is a really, really powerful one. And what this does is it allows you to change what's being filtered, or what filters you're sort of allowing on your data. And this is a different kind of way of thinking than Excel, I've found anyway. But once you kind of get it, it's really, really powerful. So what we're doing is we're calculating count responses, which is that measure we just did. So count responses, we're calculating that, but we're doing it over all of the possible responses. So instead of saying for each response, calculate the count and get the numbers 40, 173, 253, etc., we're going to count responses over all of the possible responses, and that'll give us that total number of 1,038. So calculate lets you change what filters are being applied to your data when it's displayed. And then this all says do it over all of these things from this table, which are the very low, low, medium, very high, and high. So we have the all, we have count responses, and we have count all responses there. So now that we have those two measures, count responses and count all responses, now we can divide the two, and then we can get our percent responses. Again, we have our title, percent responses, equals, and then we're referencing those other DAX formulas, count responses, dividing just using a slash, and then count all responses. And then when we put that on the table, it will show as a percentage breakdown for each of these categories. So that's just some basic DAX formulas, referencing and using some functions of count and the calculate function to get at a percentage. So we have our percent and our count all. All right. So now let's actually look and see what this looks like and how to enter them into Power BI. So if we go back to our Power BI desktop file here, we're in our data view or our data model view over here. And this is how you can get to these different views. So we have our model view over here. We can go to our data view, and that actually lets us see the data that's in our tables, get a nice preview there. But where we want to go is to our report view over here on the left. And this gives us our blank canvas. And this is where we can start to build our measures and build our visualizations. So what we want to do is add a measure that's just that count responses measure. So as with anything in Power BI, there's 3 or 4 different ways to do this, but the way I like to do it is go over to fact responses. So this is the table where I want my measure to live, and right click and then go to new measure. And so that will add this measure that's no name right now, and it will pop up this editor up in the top of the canvas that allows you to type in your measure. So I'll type in the name first. So this is just count responses. And then equals, and then we'll use count. And again, as I type, this is called IntelliSense. It will pop up the possible things you might want to use here. So we'll just do count. And then it will say, okay, what column do you want to count up? And we want to count up the response column. And you'll notice there is a dim response column, but that's not what we want. We want the fact responses column, because that has all the duplicated information, and that will give us a true count of the students who responded to those questions. So I'll go down here to fact responses, and double click on it, and that will populate the formula there. And then I'll just close parentheses. And to process a measure, you can either hit the check mark to commit, or you can hit the enter key on your keyboard. And now what that did is it create a count responses measure over here under fact responses. And so if I check this box next to it, it will add that to my canvas just as a default visual. And what I'll do is I'll actually change this over to a matrix visual. So you can see, and this might be kind of small, but you can see what that looks like is it just shows the total number of responses. So it's not broken down by anything. So there it says 10, 5, 5, 6. So that's just the total number of responses. So what we need to do is start breaking this down by our various dimensions. So over here in the visualizations pane in the middle, you can see I have values and I have count responses right there. So what I need to do is populate these rows and columns to start breaking down that number into something that's more useful. So to do that, I'll first go to dim question, that table there, and I'll grab the question column, and I'll just click and drag it in, and I'll display that on my rows. And when I do that, you see, now it displays all the questions on the rows and all the different responses. So for each of these questions, there are 754 responses for every single one. And the total was 10,556. So now what I want to do, though, is break this down further by my responses. So if I expand in response and I grab the response, we'll do the text in this case, and drag that into the columns area here. Now you can see there's a breakdown for every question showing every single response category and each question and the count of students who responded with those two at the intersection of the two. So that's what we're going for, and that's how these calculations kind of work, and how to build kind of a basic table using a count responses measure. So now what we want to do is actually continue and build those other two measures. So I'll go ahead and right-click on fact responses again and click New Measure. And this will be our count all responses. And again, we'll do the calculate, and we'll reference that other count responses measure we already did. So there's count responses. And again, we'll do it over all of our dim response. So table. So that says calculate count responses, but don't filter by our responses. So I'll click that, and now we have count all responses. So if I drag that into the values here, you can see for every single one, we have the count, and then we have the count all. And for the count all, it's going to be the same for every single one of these because they're all the same as 754. So now we can do one more that will do our percentage. So I'll do a new measure, and we'll call this percent responses, and do equals count. Again, we'll reference the count responses, and then we'll do a slash to divide, and then we'll reference the count all. And so we have count responses divided by count all, hit enter. And now if I put that on our table, then you'll see it will show, in this case, a decimal. So now we want to kind of clean this up a little bit. And if you click on a measure name over in the table where it's contained of percent responses here, to select it and highlight it, you can actually go up to the modeling tab up at the top. And here's where you can change the type of data it is, or how it's displayed. So you can change the format. It can be, currency, it can be scientific, whole number, decimal number, etc. But in our case, we want percentage, and we'll change it down to 1 decimal place. So that says every time you display this measure, by default, show it as a percentage in 1 decimal place. There are a lot of other different options here. If you have zip codes, you may want to categorize those. If you have URLs, you can categorize those, etc. So just know that the modeling tab for measures gives you some options for how to display those. And then what we can do actually on our table, now that we have the percent measure, we don't need the count and count all anymore. It doesn't have to be displayed anymore. We already have them sort of programmed in. So we can get rid of those by clicking the X over here in values. And now we have just our questions. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. There we go. So now we have our questions, our responses, and we have the percentages that go along with those. Okay. So that table is just really for illustrative purposes. So what we want to do is actually start to create more visualizations, and with some colors and some nice things that are a little bit more appealing to end users. So what we'll do is actually over here in our visualization list, we have a lot of different types of visuals that are built in. So I was just using a matrix there. There are donut charts and pie charts and scatter charts, card visuals to display one key metric. There are a lot of different options for visuals. So what we're going to do is use the stacked bar chart. And you'll see I can actually just change the type of visual that's being used over to stacked bar by clicking on it. And now it will change my visual. But you'll see it didn't quite know how to interpret what I had done before. So my question is on my axis, the response text is also on my axis, and values, percent responses. So I do need to do some fixing here. So question on the axis is right, but we want the response text to actually be our legend. So I can just drag response text down into the legend. And now this will display more as a chart that we want to see. So we'll see each question, then we'll see the breakdown out of 100% of each of these responses. And now I can do some further customization of this chart. So to sort of customize and format how a chart looks, you can use the format pane. So usually we're on the fields pane right now in the visualizations tab or pane. And now we can go over to the format pane by clicking on that. And that gives you all the options to change your legend, how it displays, change your axes, change the data colors, change the labels. So what we're going to do is we'll turn the data labels on, and you'll see that now displays the percentages there. So then the other thing we want to do is we want to change our title. So you can change that. So we'll call this percent responses by question and response. And you can change the font color, you can change the font size, change the background of the title. So there's a lot of different options here. You don't need to know the specifics of exactly what things I'm selecting here, but there's things you can play around with to get this formatted in a nice way. So another one you may want to change is the data colors. So maybe we want high to be green, low to be red, and we'll do very high as a darker green, and we'll do very low as a darker red, and maybe medium as a yellow. And that'll give some color indication of what people are looking at. One other thing you'll notice is these are not in order. So they are in alphabetical order, high, low, medium, very low, but we want them in a different order. So Power BI does this a little bit, I don't know, it's sort of clunky in how it does it, but you can set the sort order. You can customize how it gets sorted. So to set the sort for a particular column, in this case our response text, you have to have another column to sort it by. So response text is what we want to sort here, and that's in dim response. So if I click on dim response in my fields list and click on response text, then up in the modeling tab, you'll see there's this sort by column option. And I want to sort this text, high, low, medium, very low, by the actual response value in the response column. So that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I click on sort by column, then click on change it over to response, you'll see that now it goes from very low to very high. And now these are ordered so you can get a sense of these two, C2 and C3, aren't not doing as well as a lot of the other questions. So that's how you sort something sort of manually, is by having another column and then using the sort by column feature to say, sort this column that's text by this column that's usually a number.
This might be a good time to mention a few things about the uses of Power BI. As you've seen before it was put into this visualized bar chart, you can use Power BI to create the same sort of tables that you were able to create before, and it does make it more efficient and be able to create everything you had in the past. But I think the power of this program is being able to visualize data in ways that was very difficult or possibly not possible in the past. So you want to think about the multiple ways that the data can be more accessible or better understood or understood in a different way, and use Power BI for ways to be able to make your data have more impact on the stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a great point. Is it's nice to have the previous thing you've done before and just try and recreate it, but thinking about what's possible and what's new and what's different about data visualization and using this tool is really, really good to keep in mind. So I just changed a couple other things while Fred was talking. I just sort of changed the size of the axis and the legend and added a border. So again, there's a lot of different formatting options you can use to display this data. So the great thing, one great thing about Power BI is how reusable everything is, really. So, you know, I use that percent responses here, and that references those other things, so it's kind of reusing those measures over and over. The other thing that's nice is you can actually just copy and paste visuals to reuse most of your formatting options. So I have my visual here that I'm just moving around and resizing using the handles there. And what I can do is actually just copy and paste this if I want to display it in maybe a slightly different way or maybe a filtered way to give my end users even more of a detailed view of what they want to see. So all I have to do to copy and paste is just Control-C and then Control-V, and that creates a copy of that with the exact same formatting. And now I can manipulate this to display some different things. So I have my, instead of by question here, maybe I will replace question in my axis with category. And so you see it changed it over to category. And now instead of every single response, maybe I want to show my response category. So I'll change the legend from response text to response category. And now this gives a more summarized view of, well, it's actually the, and these you'll see these colors aren't right, so I'll go ahead and change those. Negative will be red, neutral will be yellow, and positive will be green. And now you see it's actually the assessment category that has the worst you know, feedback, and overall score is actually, though, pretty good. So that gives a nice summarized view, whereas this you kind of have to sort through and look at individual questions and kind of summarize them on your own. Here it's nice to have that summarized view. The other thing I want to point out about this is I added, you can see I have category text and then I have the question down below. And when you add multiple fields like this, what it does is it creates the option for drilling down, and those are these buttons up here. So I can still drill down to the individual question by clicking on the two arrows down, and I can drill back up. Or I can click this down arrow on, and now I can actually click on any of these categories, and it will show me the questions underneath them. And so you can display both a summarized version and give people the option to drill into or drill down and see the more detailed version. So that's a really nice way to save space and still give users the power to explore from a summarized view that gives them that more, the broader information than they want to get the details about. The other thing I want to note here in this chart you can do is you can actually filter these charts. So in this case, I just want to display the negative results and then rank them so you can see, okay, what are the most negative to the most positive? So to do that, there is actually in the visualizations pane in the middle here, if you scroll down, you can get to the filters option. And there are visual level filters that apply to just this chart. There's the page that applies to this page in the report. And then there's a report that applies to everything. So in this case, what I want to actually do is actually filter the response category. So I'll expand that and to only show the negative responses. And now you see the neutral and positive went away, and now it's only showing the negative. So if I just want people to focus on the negative, I could show that filtered view. And now you see it's pretty good, but it'd be nice if it were sorted highest to lowest. So I can actually go in using these three dots for the visual, and I can sort descending, and I'll have to change what it sorts by. So instead of the category, I'll change it to percent, and now you see now it sorts highest to lowest percent. So there are sorting options that you can sort of, again, do a lot of the work for people. You're visualizing the data for. So that they don't have to do it every time they go to it. They don't have to wade through the details. They can start with the summary and then go into the details if they need to. All right.
Now, one of the powers of this program is to be able to take the data that you have, and this is just new ways to see the data. But now think about what if you can take this data and be able to look at specific cohorts or specific groups that are encapsulated in this data that isn't seen on the surface.
Yes, and so for that, what we want to actually do is add a couple of other visuals, and Power BI calls these slicers. They're really filters, and they give end users the option to filter down and see data by particular groupings. So one of them we might want to add is, let's say we want to add a transfer category from DIM student. So I can check the box, or I can drag transfer over onto a blank spot on my canvas. And you'll see it made it just as kind of a table there, but I'm actually going to switch it over to this slicer visual type, and that's in the bottom left corner of the visualization selection window there. So I'll change it to a slicer, and now you can see it switched it over to be sort of selection boxes. So if I click on transfer, it will filter all the other two tables and just show me the data from transfer students. Same with non-transfer, and then I can click off of it and it'll show me for everybody. So slicers are really, really powerful to give users the option to see subsets of data. Slicers are also have some special formatting options. So there's this tiny little drop-down arrow that says select the type of slicer, and you can change that over to a drop-down instead of a list. And there are other options for other filters, numerical filters and things like that, to say less than 5 or whatnot. But you can just switch it over to different types, and this will be a drop-down. So now it saves some space usually if you have a long list. And so now you can say transfer, non-transfer, or both. So there is a slicer. And again, this is all reusable, so I can just copy and paste by hitting Control-C, Control-V, and then I can drag in, instead of transfer, I could drag in residency status. And now I have a residency slicer, just like that. And so I could say resident, transfer students, and those will both be applied, and I can see the results for those students to see if there's any difference between transfer and resident or non-resident. So this is where that interaction starts to come in. It's you start to build your filters, you start to build your charts, and so your end users can have some more power in how they look at data. So the next thing I want to talk about is building in some different groupings to be able to see data in a different way. And this may actually be another option to answer the question earlier about how might you create sort of those manual row by row kind of categories of things. This might be a way to get at that depending on your data. So what we want to do here is actually look at our courses. So we have course name here. So if we were to add that as a slicer, that gives us, our courses. But what I actually want to do here is instead of giving all the courses, I want to actually see if there's a difference between lab courses and non-lab courses. Now in this case, we don't have very many courses, so you could just select lab and then you can select all the other ones. But I actually want to summarize this a little bit to make it easier on my users, so they can just select labs versus non-labs. So I'm going to delete this by clicking on, by just hitting the delete key on my keyboard. That'll delete the slicer out of there. So I actually want to create what's called a group in Power BI. And to do that, I'll right-click on course name, and I'll click on new group. And that'll pop open an editor that will list all of the values and give you the option to create groups out of those. So I'm going to call this lab group. That's the name of my field. And I'll click on the lab course and click group, and then call this lab. And then I'll click on all the other groups, select them, click group, and we'll call this non-labs. So now we have more of a categorized view of these courses rather than having them all one by one and they need to be selected. So I'll click OK. That added a new field over here in DIM course, and you see it has this little icon that says, yeah, this is a group. And so now I'll just copy and paste my residency slicer and switch it out with the lab group. And so now we have labs and non-labs. So that's a way, again, to get at more of a customized category that would be maybe a little bit difficult to get at using the query editor. And it's also just a nice quick way of grouping things in the report editor.
So one thing about data, we can look at data as a way to simply be descriptive. This is simply the way things are. But the usefulness of data is to infer the meaning that's behind the data. So being able to create visualizations and the opportunity to look deep inside the data and try to understand why the data looks as it is the value of something like Power BI, and create visualizations, and to have multiple people manipulate the data to try to get into the depth of why are things the way they are, and what are the constructs that we need to understand to be able to move toward creating improvements in whatever our purpose is for whatever group that you work with.
So one thing you want to do as well with Power BI reports is make them look a little bit more maybe credible. And so you can build your visualizations out, but and your slicers, and sort of summarize them for users and make them nice and useful. But one thing that I like to do is actually add a couple of other elements to every report. And I'm just moving things around here just to make some room at the top. So what I'm going to add here at the top of this report is just a title, and you could add some description, maybe some data definitions, etc., as well as a logo. So I'm going to go back to the Home tab, and Power BI has the option to just add text. You can add images, you can add shapes and buttons and things, but I'll just add a text box, and we'll type into our text box data reporting dashboard, whatever the title happens to be, and I'll drag it up and resize it, and then change my text around a little bit. And there's some options here. You can create URLs, and you can do all of the text formatting you want. So there is my title. One of the things I also want to point out while I have this here is in the Format tab up at the top, whenever you have a visual selected, there are some options here. So I can align this to the center of my report, and it will auto-align. And that creates a nice clean look, using these alignment options here that can give your dashboard a little bit more credibility than if you have things kind of just randomly dispersed throughout your report. So now that I have the title, I'll go back and add an image. And I have one here. I'll just click open. And so what we like to do in our reports is add our actual word mark for our office, just in the upper left-hand corner. Make it pretty small. We don't need it to stand out really, but you can just put it there. And that again gives the report a little bit more credibility. So now we have one page in a pretty good format. Just as with measures, just as with individual visuals, you can also copy and paste pages to reuse everything you've done. So a Power BI report is built on pages, and you'll see down here at the very bottom, there it says page 1. And actually, I can rename this by double-clicking on it to just say visualization or something like that. But if you right-click on that, you can duplicate the page. You can also just add a new blank one. But if I duplicate that, then I'm going to rename this one to the table version. So instead of displaying things as a visual like this, I'm going to actually delete this one and take this one and change it to a matrix, going back to where we were at the beginning. And so now it's in this table version. So now if, let's say, someone has a report they need to put a table into, or something for accreditation or some other outside agency, you can display this in multiple ways. And you saw just how fast it was to duplicate that page and then change the visualization type. Now I might need to do some more formatting to this, but I can get it in that exact format I need, and I will always need in the future, so that you have both the visualization version that's exploratory and the table version that's more standardized that can be used. So the report can be used in multiple ways without having to download or export information, reconfigure it, reformat it, and do a lot of extra work. So the goal here is to automate this as much as possible all along the way, from the data preparation part to the visualization part to the data use part, so that the data is as efficient as possible, so that people have more time to actually think about and explore and use their data.
Although we're not going to take the time right now to show you how to adjust the table underneath the paint bar, there are multiple ways that you can format the table to be able to make it look exactly the way you want it to.
Yeah, so there are various options here. I can just change this one over to the alternating rows. There's some automatic types, and then you can customize all the different options there to change the size of various things. Again, add a title if you want, a variety of things all across there. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is actually show you how, or one way to update your report. So say we have our report finished and we've been using it for a semester or a year, and we have some new data we want to incorporate into this report. Again, we want to reuse what we've already done as much as possible, and we just want to integrate that new data so that all the things we've done are all taken advantage of. So what we'll do is actually go back to our query editor, and we're going to bring in some new data. So we'll go to new source, and we'll add a CSV file, and we'll bring in this new data from 2017-2018 and click open. And click OK. So you see now we have this new query, and this query isn't going to be its own table in our report, in our data model. What we're going to do is actually incorporate this data into our factor responses table, and then we won't even need to really use this table at all. We won't load it. So we need to incorporate it. And to do that, we'll go into factor responses. And what we want to do is we want to take advantage of all these steps we did. And so here is where we started. We started with this unpivot columns. So we'll click on the step before that. And what we'll actually do is we will append queries. And what that does is it adds all the rows from another query to this query you're on. So I click on append, and it will give me a warning, and I'll say OK. Then I can select to incorporate this new data, click OK. And now you see it added this step of appended, and then all these other steps are applied to both the data that was appended and the original data. So that incorporated it there. And now, as Fred mentioned earlier, if, let's say, a question was added, that new question would be in new question as a new question. So that data is now incorporated here, so we don't actually need to load it as a separate table, and we can disable the load of it. So to do that, you just right-click on the query and uncheck this enable load, and you'll see it turns it into an italicized name. And that means it won't load by itself, but the data's there, and the data is incorporated into factor responses. So now, if I click close and apply, it will reload. And now, if I go to my dim term table and I add a semester title slicer, there's now data. If I click on spring 2018, there's data there, whereas there wasn't before. So now you can start to think about, well, how might you visualize this over time as maybe a line chart, and how responses change, or would you want to give people the option to filter by certain semesters? So that can make it really, really fast by using that append. That's just one option that we want to show you to incorporate new data.
And it does save a tremendous amount of time in doing these type of things. I'll just let you know a little bit of information. When we used to be using the senior survey, at one time when we did it manually, it would take 3 people about 5 weeks to be able to create a report from our senior survey. Now, since we're able to pull the data directly from Qualtrics, where our senior survey exists, each time a data comes in, instead of taking 3 people 5 weeks to create the new report, it takes as much time as you saw right here, or maybe a little bit more. It might take 15 or 20 minutes, but we have the entire new report created automatically because of the automation that's built into the program.
And I will say the key thing with that, and the thing that made it really fast this time, is that this data has the exact same column names and is in the exact same format as our original data from the year before. So if these columns change, that's where you're going to need to take that's where it might take some additional time. So you might need to change them to make sure they match up so that when you append them, it appends in the right spot. So it can be very fast if nothing's changing. If things are changing, it still saves you a lot of time. You just have to go in and edit a few things here and there. Okay. All right, so that's really the basics of the report. I do want to show you in the finished version over here, there are some additional visuals that we used. We're not going to go through these in detail right now. And they're based on some additional measures that we added to our fact responses. There's a % students measure and count students. So in here we have transfer status. So again, it's all interactive and clickable. So we have this showing this sort of demographic breakdown that allows you to filter. And we have these card visuals that show how many students responded and how many responses there were total. Same thing with this table one. It's got a little bit more formatting here to show some conditional formatting to show green if it's good, red if it's bad, etc. And then we also have some examples of what this report might look like with some more analytics, and this has to be enabled. So I won't do that now, but that's there, and if you enable it, it will give you some instructions on how to do that. I'll show you some additional analytics you can run to show, okay, what's some key factors in the various scores. So what's driving the score to be low or high, etc. So there's a lot more beyond the basics that we've shown you is what we want to get to. And the point of this to say, you know, think big and think about, well, how might I want to see this? And note too that this is all just really, really easy to edit. So if you don't want this visual anymore, get rid of it. Add a different percentage, add a different breakdown, retitle it, and you're done. It's very, very iterative, and it doesn't lock you into what you've already done. It makes it very easy to make changes. And that's one of the reasons we really like it is we'll make one version of this, we'll show it to the people we built it for. They'll say, no, we want it this way, we want it this way, we want it this way. And then it's really easy to make changes. And then we can display it in the way that others want it rather than sort of get locked into one version of things that's static, that stays that way all the time. All right. So the last thing actually I want to show you here is what you do with the report when you're done. And this is where that sharing question, and we'll go into some more details about this here in a second, but when you're done building a report, you actually want to share it with people. You actually publish it up to the cloud service or to a website, basically, powerbi.com. So you do that by clicking publish, and you have to save it first. And then you select where you want to go to, and I'm just going to do my workspace. And then once it uploads, then it will look like this. So I am in powerbi.com, and I signed in. And now over here on my workspace in this report space, if I click on it, here's my report. This is on the web. I don't need any special software. So end users don't just need to log in and then and any browser, and they can still interact with everything. They can click here and there. They can, you know, view all the reports and all of the different ways. And here's that analytics visual that shows the influencers and the segments. And so this is really nice. You know, show, okay, what's influencers' responses to be high or low or neutral, and gender, academic year, course level, etc. So it'll show you some key differences there. And then they can export this, and they can do a lot of things. We're going to cover that in the later training, and you'll all get the recording if you're not able to attend that. So that's just the basics of publishing to a workspace. So you publish it, and then you can share it using the share option, and you can type in an email address and share it with another K-State person. Okay, so now we'll just talk a little bit more about sharing and some resources, and then we'll take your questions for the last few minutes. So again, we worked in this Power BI desktop client software on your computer. That's free to download, publish it. That's that service that I just showed you, and then that's where end users can access it. And there are a few different options for sharing.
Okay, originally, when we started it, we used the free version. That you have the free version. You can download the program itself for free, and you can share it online just with a public link, and that gives you a web link. And you don't. It doesn't cost anything to have it. The only thing you have to recognize with the free link that you cannot selectively choose who it goes to, and the data that's within it, the raw data, is accessible to those who receive it. So most likely you're not going to want to use the free report unless you absolutely have data that is shareable to anyone through a link. Beyond that, there's a mechanism to be able to export the to desktop. If you want to export it into a PDF file, that requires a pro license to be able to export it to PDF. Here at Kansas State University, if you are a creator and want to embed reports in our particular site license, to create, it would cost $25 per user to create, to be able to directly share within our site license. We do have a site license on campus in which everyone on campus has the capacity to be able to view a specific report that's shared with them. And then you can identify it's just this person or just this group of people that receives it. So the license for the user is $25 to be able to share within this community we have of K-State, within the K-State community.
Yeah, so K-State pays for that site license. That's the $20,000. That's around there somewhere as a contract with Microsoft. So we pay that as an institution. And what that means is that for an individual author or creator, all you have to do is pay $25 per year, and you can create a Power BI desktop, Power BI report and dashboard, and share it with anybody with no additional cost. So all you have to do is get that license, and then you can share it with anyone else on campus for free, essentially, after you pay your license fee of $25 per year per user.
Yeah, so the program is free to use, but the $25 gives you the opportunity to share to specific people within our community.
And the pro license can be requested on the K-State website. You can just search for Power BI, and the license form comes up. It's a ServiceNow form. It's $25 per year. It's prorated. I think the year ends June or so. So you can get that license for relatively cheap and start to build Power BI reports and share them with the end user. So again, just go and search for Power BI. The IT department, the Information Systems Office, runs this. And they can answer any questions about the licensing you might have. There's also a few other things I want to mention as resources on campus. There is a Power BI users group. That's an email list, and we have meetings every once in a while to just talk about Power BI. If you have questions on licensing or sharing or how to do measures or really anything related to the system, that's a nice group to be a part of. You can email Chuck Gould in the Information Systems Office. He runs that group, and he can get you added. We also have a Slack channel, so you can get yourself added to that as well. And that's great for just some quick questions back and forth. So I did want to also mention about the data warehouse, and there's a lot in flux with that right at the moment. There's a data warehouse task force. They're moving infrastructure and moving systems after the library fire. And so there's a lot of things that are going on right now in that area. So there's no, IT has told me they're not really allowing new users into the student data warehouse to get access to all that data right now. Though they said they would talk to you about it if you want to email them. That's, again, that Chuck Gould. He'd be able to answer those questions. So there's no real way to get access to that right now, but there's a lot coming. And I think in the next 6 months to a year, there'll be a lot more on that to get access to more of the data, like data that comes from cases in the data warehouse. We've also provided several files, and we're going to send them out to everybody on the registered for for any of our sessions. So we'll have the files we use today, all the source files, as well as the finished version. We have some other files, which I will show you now, which include this file. It's on, tells you about DAX and actually shows you screenshots of what, and gives you some functions on, just basic functions on what it looks like, how it actually calculates things. So if you're interested more in the details, or if you're having trouble with why doesn't it do what you think it's doing or is supposed to do, you can check that out. We also have some links to some various web resources that we found useful. There's some really good sites out there. And we have a report publishing checklist, so things to check before you publish, because you're working with a lot of data, and you're working with a lot of raw data often, and data that might be identifiable. So you want to make sure you don't expose that in any way. So this kind of tells you a little bit about that and just some things to check. And then there's also another one that's related to that, which is about how some strategies to make sure that confidential data stays confidential. So there are some different strategies to use in that file that talk about that. Let's see here. One other thing I wanted to mention is on powerbi.com, this is where you can download the desktop client for free. And this is also where you can get help and support and look at, they have some guided learning, which are Microsoft provided videos, which are pretty good on how to use Power BI. There is also a community where you can vote for ideas on how to improve the system. And there's this galleries here. And in galleries, there's a data stories gallery. And this can give you some ideas on how to format reports. Some really creative reports here. You know, it shows you maps, shows you different things. So you can click on these, and these are all interactive. They're published here. And this can give you some nice ideas of how to display things in different ways. And then, again, they're all interactive. So they can give you some ideas on how you might create your report in a little bit different way. So I wanted to point that out because this is where I've gotten a lot of ideas for my reports and how to display them. Okay. So that is all we had to cover. So we'll go ahead and, again, open it up for questions here for the last about 5 or 10 minutes or so. Okay. So there were a couple of questions already in the chat. Can you remove the total? Yes, you can remove the total. There's a subtotal option over in, let's go over to here. So if we look at, our table version of this, there is we have the subtotals here and grand totals. So if we go into the formatting pane, there's an option for subtotals, and you can turn them off. And if you have grand totals, there's also an option for that as well. So you can remove those totals and just display things without totals. There's another question asking about, can you share it on an internal website? Yes, so there is an option on a secure website. You can do a publish to an internal website. So I go into the service here, and I go up to, so this is on the Power BI website. So this is where I can share with the user, but I can also go to File and get an embed link. And this is where you can securely embed the website in your internal website. So embed will let you do that. You do still need that pro license, but embed will let you securely embed that. Whereas if you were to do publish to web, should be an option here. Well, maybe it's not. There's usually a publish to web option in here. That's more the public link. So it'll give you 2 different options for a public link or a secure link in there to share. Okay, any other questions anyone might have?
Is our sound up? Yeah.
Well, we hope you found this information useful. As Chris mentioned, we're going to be sending out lots of information that will help you, and also know that we're willing to work with you independently and help you move forward with the use of this. Here's another question, I think. That's a thank you. You're very welcome.
Yeah, we're available if you want to email us at assessment@ksu.edu. Again, we'll email out those links if you want to respond to that and ask a specific question. We're happy to help. We're really trying to build more the K-State community, so if you can get involved with that users group, that would be great as well. That way everyone can take advantage of the answers to your questions.
Well, thanks a lot. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and we're definitely going to learn right along with you to take advantage of the visualizations that are possible. And just remember that when you want to share data, of course you want to be able to share the data the way you've had it before, but also think of the opportunities that you haven't had in the past. Dream of the possibilities, how useful your data would be, and make that happen.
And one other quick question that was just asked about how to sign up for the Slack channel. We'll send that in the email. We'll send the link out so you can get added to that right away. Thank you all for being here. And we'll look forward to seeing some of you at the viewer training, which is this afternoon. And then again, we'll send out all the links shortly thereafter. Thanks.